Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and as always it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. Today, Hitman. It's a series of titles stretching back almost as far as the number barcoded on the back of the giant bald dude that no one's supposed to notice just because he wears a bandana around his arm. But that's also a sign of their success, and despite missteps, the fact is almost no one can argue the awesomeness of basically being an armed-to-the-hilt Zodiac killer in a video game. Let's see how Hitman 2 does, shall we? Hitman 2 is going to be out November 13th on PC, PS4, and Xbox One for the suggested retail price of $59.99. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Hitman 2. Uninvited house guests, easy right turn baby, and the world's least scary, evil corporation. Graphics are up first. Overall, Hitman 2 looks good. It's got a focus on world presentation in areas where there's so many NPCs it looks like a video game version of Multiplicity. Now, like Hitman 1 prior to it, the game does try to make sure that there's a uniform distribution of clothing and outfits as well as general looks to the NPCs to break up that visual landscape. It doesn't always come off perfect. In this day and age of so many games pushing the graphics envelope, Hitman 2 instead goes for an overall improved look, but doesn't really knock it out of the park when it comes to any one area other than character count. Does that mean it's bad? Far from it. I have to say, some of the level designs here really surprise me. They're superb, but many of them are incredibly varied. For example, Miami, which is a dynamic level and has complexity underneath that initial simplicity that it first presents in basically just a giant crowded area. Now, this does have huge crowds stretching down VIP areas into clubs and across massive locations next to a live supercar race. That really does make it hit home on just how far along the games have come in their presentation. Or the phenomenal Whittleton Creek, which is a little neighborhood conflicted on all sides by neighbors arguing over land rights, homes being worked on, construction areas, fishing locations, and more. Whittleton Creek might be my favorite level in a Hitman game, or at least one that sticks out to me the most. I think that's because it comes later in the story and signals a swift adjustment to the overall plan of most of the other levels. When it comes to Hitman, it'd be hard to argue that many times you sort of know the general setup of a location, with many targets 3 to 4 corners of the map, all in their own locations. But turning off all the helpings and the settings and playing Whittleton Creek is amazing and goes a long way in really breaking up the fatigue you can get visually when playing a game like this, and then injects a moment of almost rural respite into the title. Animation and texture work are about on the level as Hitman 1, which means while you aren't seeing an insane amount of hyper-detailed texturing, there are moments of brilliance, like the insides of a castle and the rock walls slowly falling apart around it. Frankly, at times that's sandwiched between some poor textures, especially that exist in the forested areas of the game. I'm not even 100% sure how they got there. Overall, I'd say it's fine, but at times it's a bit hit and miss, while animations do continue along the same lines as Hitman 1 as well. Now, when it comes to performance, I played the PS4 Pro version, which offers a 30 FPS locked and an uncapped mode. When it comes down to it, the overall variable FPS was actually fine, which is rare for me in a game. It did drop frame rate at times, especially in locations with a heavy use of fog, with a couple levels really accentuating that hit. But the trade-off was most of the other times a higher frame rate than the past titles. When it comes to the resolution, we do see some of those improvements from the enhanced versions, with the PS4 actually being 1080p, the Xbox being 1080p, the PS4 Pro actually offering you a 1440p resolution or a super sampled 1080p, and I have to admit they all looked pretty good. On the PC, of course, nothing is capped, and you can basically have whatever resolution you want as long as you're paying out the ass for it. One thing to know about the PC game does use Denuvo as its DRM, so be aware of that if that matters to you. Overall, I'll say this, Hitman 2 isn't going to knock your socks off if you played Hitman 1. It looks a bit better in places than the enhanced versions of the original game's levels, but there are a couple absolute standouts here that do deserve mention, and one of those is, at least to me, some very interesting level design. Sound, music, and voice.
We're bleeding operatives. Panic is spreading, and now we are axing our own?
Knox was a traitor. He would have caused incalculable damage.
And he won't be the last. This is exactly what the enemy wants. We need to fight the sickness, not the symptom.
And I have just the tool for the job.
And let's do music first. Now, this is about on par with Hitman 1 as well. While there are some tracks I loved in here, particularly when there's a beat sound, almost like a ticking clock counting down to the moment before everyone realizes you're not a 6'4" Rogaine commercial, and instead probably a hired assassin, it works pretty well. Both ambient, more solid orchestral fare is here, and while it never lofts itself up into the performance some expect from the best of game titles, what you do get here is a solid accompaniment to your high-caliber hijinks. Sound. Now, I gotta admit, while taking out enemies knee-deep in sand with the grass billowing around me, it really does show how far games have matured in the sound quality of the presentation. With an excellent use of surround, the game's audibly informative at all times. The number of times I was saved by hearing someone's footsteps on a stairwell or the creak of a door opening echoing behind me and being able to pinpoint where they were exactly was very high, and I love that. It also has some options that not only give you surround, stereo, and headphones, but actually describe the exact degrees of angle for those who aren't really 100% knowledgeable about those kind of choices that they can make. In fact, it's a small quality of life kind of adjustment, just a bit of text, and this is something you're probably going to hear a lot about when it comes to coverage for Hitman 2. Of course, when it comes to gun sounds, they're standard Hitman. Now, some people may think, man, guns, who cares how they sound? I'm never going to actually use them. And that's all fine and well, but some of us don't actually go silently into that good night. In fact, I like my Hitmen sometimes like I like my girlfriends, obnoxiously loud and leaving nothing but catastrophe in their wake. I want everyone to know I was there. I mean, otherwise it's just a long line of people who mysteriously choked on T-bones, and that's not actually that scary. Environmentally, however, the game absolutely excels, and it must be mentioned. Dozens of layered over sound effects, depending on where you are, all play out. The first time you go to a frog sanctuary, which, yes, is a real thing, shows just how deep environmental sound can work to make a game feel real. Too many times we get into games where if you're not 1 foot from a friggin' traffic jam, all sound stops. Not in Hitman. It's useful, it's uniformly well done, and it holds to the important facet of helping the game player. Overall, very good. And that brings us to voice, and I have to say this, for the most part it's excellent. David Bateson just knows how to play a character that appears one-dimensional, but especially here in Hitman 2, has to move a little south of his normal safety zone, and it works very well to tell a story. This can't be the easiest job. Agent 47's like that guy we all know that when gunshots go off, he hides his cup of tea because he doesn't want the cup to get shattered. For the most part, that actually works, but here you do get to see him stretch a bit, and I liked it, especially as the plot works its way into unique areas not all covered in prior games, and the normal reactions of characters that aren't really always aiming for the status quo. Sadly, I absolutely cannot say the entire evil corporation has that subtlety. You find yourself up against a table of leaders who's a who's who of, seriously, who's actually who, because it sounds like a bad Shakespeare in the Park rendition of Leaders. If you asked a bunch of 4-year-olds what evil sounds like, they'd scotch tape a crayon sketch of these guys to a Christmas list with earplugs at the top. In fact, the drop in quality is almost impressive if it wasn't so in your face due to the many cutscenes they're involved in. While NPCs in the game world have a number of varied responses and tonal changes depending on the level you're in and the situations, this evil group's table of terror has all the emotional range of a piece of paper that just says bad guy on it. Overall, I gotta say the mains are great, the NPCs are well done, but it does have a couple of misses. Gameplay and a bit about the story. You play as Agent 47, the Hitman, in another tale of you jumping into coach on any airline that'll have you and then speeding in the lives of almost everyone around like a Grim Reaper on a time limit. While Hitman is structured like the prior games, its story isn't, slowly finding out that much of what Agent 47 has done may have been the work of a corrupt organization with him on the end of its puppet strings, and I have to hand it to him. While it's not the most engaging story ever, for a Hitman game I actually found myself interested in what was going on versus hammering whatever button equaled skip cutscene. It's a direct sequel to Hitman 1, and that does play off well in those moments, and it improves on the storytelling. But the real question is, what does it offer you? Well, Hitman 2 offers another 6 open-world levels to explore, some larger than others, with the massive Florida map easily as large as any map in the prior Hitman games, and the Colombian location larger still. Each mission starts with Agent 47 getting a roster of targets he needs to take out, as well as the choice of where items are stowed in that level prior, while unlockable locations come out as you go through the missions, as well as the difficulty level and a starting location. And I have to admit, I really enjoyed the structure of Hitman 1 originally, and I still like it here in 2. Its flexibility across its form and function is spectacular, and the number of ways in which you can take out enemies is incredible, which makes sense for a game called Hitman. What's nice here is the developers always excelled at the puzzle-like structure of their levels, this interweaving of momentary interactions between you and the game world before you fade back into obscurity. Hitman 2 continues at the same pace. One mission alone, I must have killed the first target 30 different ways. Yes, that's because on the second target, I died about 30 times. From tossing an iron at their face and then dumping them into a cocaine leaf crunching machine to knifing them and choking out their guards to poisoning their tea and crumpets. Then hiding their body in a hungry hippo holding pin. And no, that's actually not a joke. You can do that here. That's where Hitman 2 shines. It's that extension of gameplay into the environment that works so well. That elasticity to Hitman 2 I actually didn't feel was always available in Hitman 1, and the number of times I found my plans thwarted by a random onlooker or some wayward guard was many, more so than in the original. But so too were the ways in which I could work around those situations, as I said before. And with the new additions to weapons and items, as well as the additions being available in the Hitman 1 levels if you download them, it's a noticeable improvement. Now, splitting hairs here for a moment between stealth and balls out action for a second, I have to say this. I've always felt Hitman was ultimately pretty fair in how it handles stealth over gunplay. And if you go in loud, enemies here do search you down pretty ruthlessly. You can indeed go in silently, poisoning or natural eventing everyone's end of life moments and leaving none the wiser, but you can also mix and match. Now for me, I played it pretty dynamically. If it made sense to take someone out as well as a couple guards, I'd do that. If I saw some kind of environmental kill, I did that as well, but your mileage is going to vary. I admit though, sometimes I like to test these games, and it's fun to go in guns blazing. Because sometimes I want a cacophony of combat fatalities likes of which would cause NATO to look and go, maybe we should check on this. But the ability to, say, go into a location, leave a body on the opposite side of a destination as a distraction, then sneak into a building and slowly whittle away at the population inside it until the last guy at the party looks around and thinks, where the hell is everyone, is awesome. Now, when it comes to killing, Agent 47 has many of the same weapons he's had in the past games, both pre-planned killing methods like the garrote or silenced pistol, but we also see the return of the briefcase, which allows you to carry a larger weapon without making the guards say, man, it's odd that this baseball mascot has an AK-47. And we also see concussive weapons that can stun enemies for quick escapes or quick endings. Environmental kills run the gamut from one-step moments where the suspect explosion takes out someone eating at the local hot dog stand, all the way to multi-step affairs with a good deal of pre-planning and some serious people watching. Of course, while all this may sound like an extension of the original game, there's a number of additional modes as well. The first is Ghost Mode, which is a two-player mode where, surprisingly enough, you play as ghosts that are visible by the opposing player. As the levels load, random enemies are chosen, so no two games are ever exactly alike, and you need to silently kill those targets. And the first to get 5 wins. The unique twist here is that some ghost crates are there, which are shared between players, and if you take an item out of it, that item becomes unavailable to the other player. This offers a very unique non-lethal strategy to hampering your opponent. It's a cool addition that both allows for you to pit against other players in a more direct manner, but it doesn't allow for them to affect your game in an incredible amount, except for a couple gameplay elements built into it above and beyond that. The second is you also have a true co-op mode where you play as 2 assassins trying to take down targets with sniper rifles only. You also get extra XP for timing shots at the same time and planning multi-shot kills. Now when it comes to returning modes, you have a challenge mode which works well to extend the gameplay in any given level, and of course the big one here returns. I don't think anyone can argue hunting down Gary Busey wasn't the highlight of their time with Hitman, if they did it, and here elusive targets are returning with Sean Bean being the first, and others coming later. I think in one place that Hitman 2 does excel is it truly rewards players for playing through all the content many times, with upgrades doled out for every single level, as well as the main story campaign, having both challenges for how you kill enemies, giving you special rewards, but also story missions that unlock more narrative about each story, the enemies, and even the levels themselves. It's funny just how doing 2 out of 6 of these, or maybe half of them, can flesh out a level and what's really going on to a much higher degree than expected. I really do like that. Now, let's talk about AI. As you guys know, I test a game on all the difficulties for folks who are just joining their first foray into the killing fields of the Hitman games, all the way to the masterful level, which requires a deft touch in just about everything you do, otherwise the cascading effect of humans panicking and shooting at you ends up ruining your well-laid plans to electrocute a billionaire. And here, we see a couple improvements. First, the AI searched better than they had in the prior games. They aren't perfect, far from it, but there's a bit more tenacity on the higher levels than I felt that Hitman 1 offered. But it's not perfect. At times, the game's AI still seems stymied with level changes, and at some point, usually everyone goes back to doing whatever they did before, even if 20 minutes ago you exploded Ralph's head like a friggin' juicy fruit. You still do have the disguises becoming compromised, which I liked a great deal as it forces the player to not only switch when compromised, but also limits that ability in those busier areas. Lastly, the game offers a number of HUD options, including basically just turning everything off. But one addition that's important to know about is the picture-in-picture mode. This basically shows various mission moments as well as the reaction of, say, an NPC who may have found that body you dumped down an elevator shaft without checking that the lower levels elevator doors couldn't be opened by just everyone. This isn't an adjustment everybody's going to like, but if you're new to the game, these small additions can help at the very least, and they can show you what you did, and maybe seeing body found if you've left 40 bodies behind is a little bit confusing to you. Here, you might be able to notice it and then change that on a later playthrough. Now, a lot of people have had issues with Hitman's control in the past, and I have to say it's still not really perfect in Hitman 2. I wouldn't say I fought with the controls, and originally I thought it was the uncapped frame rate, so I locked it to C, but I could never get the aiming just right. It always felt a bit slow, and while there is the ability to add in acceleration for the approximately 0 people who think that's a good idea, I would suggest you turn it off as quick as possible, as that does nothing but really magnifies the problem. Is it a game killer? No, and I did become accustomed to it, but for a dude whose first name is Agent and last name's probably the number of people he had to assassinate to graduate killer school, you would have thought he'd be a bit more spry. Snap-on targeting is available for anybody who wants that. Lastly, while the AI is improved here, there are times when killing someone, knocking them out, or even entering a room set off an almost invisible alarm, which is odd and didn't really come up in the first game as much for me. This might be a side result of the changes to the AI, but it resulted in a couple times where I was underground in a cement tunnel and someone kept saying, "You don't belong here," which, yeah, it's actually right, but it's also impossible. A game like Hitman sees its success in the puzzle-like structure of its levels, combined with the expected reactions of those within the environments to the actions the player takes, and everything hinges on that being as informative to the player as it can be. And aside from a few issues here and there, Hitman 2 does exactly that. It's about the same length as the first game. It offers those levels enhanced with all the changes to anyone who already owned them, and it has a stunning amount of replayability all by itself. Fun factor. I loved it and I had a blast. Listen, not all games are going to break the bank in their changes from sequel to sequel. And in fact, if you own Hitman 1, you can download those enhanced versions, as I said here, and play them all in one massive story. And it actually feels connected. What Hitman 2 does is it offers an extension on the gameplay loop of the original, while at the same time offering new locations, new ways to take out enemies, and new weapons. At the same time, leaving behind the episodic format that many gamers felt did not work for this particular title. And that's the fun of it. It's a total blast to experiment. The challenges and the story missions extend the gameplay and gives a true reason to go back into the level, which I can say some games just don't do. And I love that about the game. It's unabashedly a sequel. It takes the strengths of the game prior, builds on it, and tries to offer more. It hits some missteps, but overall, it usually hits what it aims for. As you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale, with rent being replaced by deep sale on PC. This is absolutely worth getting right now if you like the Hitman games. If you don't, it's not really going to change much because it is a true sequel. But if you do, there's a ton of replayability here. The story mission modes are excellent. The co-op is fantastic. And the ghost mode is something that I think a lot of players are really going to enjoy. There's a ton to like here and a ton of game for the price. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. As always, you can check out Reddit, or you can follow me on Twitter or Facebook. All of that absolutely helps the channel. And of course, lastly, you can become a patron on the Patreon website, which helps me give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. So if I've saved you a little cash or found a game that you really like, I would totally appreciate you going there and maybe checking it out. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.